What is a virtual desktop and what does it mean for you? This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by you, our viewers and listeners, through our Patreon and PayPal sponsorship options. To learn more, visit macvoices.com/support. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, folks, and this is MacVoices Live. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Facebook. We would love it if you were live with us on YouTube or Facebook. Join us in the chat on either platform and throw us your questions or comments, and we will do our best to either answer them or ignore them, depending on what they are. And with this group, you'd be happier if they got ignored. Trust me. So we're going to roll just in with a couple of things that I seeded the group with, but that doesn't mean that we stick with those topics because you just never know because, hey, it's live. So go around the room, find out who's here, and then we will get to the conversation. So taking my screen, as I always do, first up, Ms. Kelly Guimont is here. Kelly, welcome, and you're back in what appears to be your normal habitat.
I am the regular room again. So, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Good to have you. Mr. David Ginsburg is here, sporting Macstock gear. David, good to see you.
How you doing? Good to be here. Yep. Kept saying we got all our Macstock hats and stuff, so why not to celebrate Macstock?
There you go. Mr. Jeff Gamet is here as well. From I don't know, is it still snowbound or is it melting, Jeff?
Oh, it's definitely melting because it's Colorado. But there are some areas like my alley that are still snowbound. So even though the road in front of my place is dry with big snow mounds running down each side of it, I can't drive anywhere because it's actually not possible to get out of my alley to a street. Ooh, but give it another 24 hours and it'll probably be fine.
Good. Okay. Good. Well, it's good to have you.
Happy to be here.
Beside him, Mr. Frank Petrie, who after simplifying his system was able to get up so we could see his green hair.
Actually, what you can do is, I'm getting it dyed again, so it's greener. They tell them to stay for the after party. I'm going to burn down the old set that I just had up.
Okay, that'll be fun.
We'll set that ablaze.
So now he will forever be known as Frank the Arsonist.
Frank, we can compare green hair stories after the show.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I actually do.
Yeah, but I got mine dyed. How did you get yours?
Are we talking about hair on top of your head? Never mind.
Oh, well, still after the show.
Okay.
Mr. Jim Ray is here. Jim, welcome for your daily weekly dose of abuse.
Please be nice.
Hey, thanks for being here. Guy Serle is here. Apparently reliving the Battle of Gettysburg for some reason.
Well, just I'll get rid of that one. Yeah. It's Macstock. I got my Macstock hat.
How much does Mike pay you guys to wear these hats? That's what I want to know.
Obviously, not enough. We need to get in more Macstock hats. I think that's.
No. The government doesn't have to know.
Mike has noticed that we've been wearing the hats.
Yes, I know.
Do we have to pay property taxes on Macstock hats?
Yeah, that's right.
Depends how high they were appraised.
Yeah, I don't think it works that way, but anyway.
It's an NFT.
Last but absolutely not least in the bottom corner, at least on my screen, is Mr. Andrew Orr. Andrew, welcome. God knows why you do this.
But I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you came. I just always am afraid that they scare you away, but I'm glad you come back.
That's
sometimes they do.
Yeah. Well, guys, I wanted to take a topic. We've been threatening to talk about this for a couple shows now, and it always seems to get bumped. And it was suggested by a listener, which is one of the reasons I want to touch on it. And that is the question he put it in. He asked about virtual desktops. Do we use virtual desktops? Do we think Apple is going there? And generally, is it a good idea? I believe, at least in some sense, Apple has gone there because there's a setting that you can transfer your desktop and I think it's your user folder or is it your documents folder to iCloud. I've forgotten which now. Documents folder. So those can live in those can live in iCloud. Yeah. And of course, I know plenty of people who, while they can you can, through a very interesting series of gymnastics that someone's happy to try to explain if you want, using symlinks, you can move a lot of your folders over into Dropbox if you want, but that requires some gymnastics. Or you could just plan to store everything in Dropbox and be done with it. Or use one of the other commercial cloud services, because we all act like it's iCloud and Dropbox. There are a number of others out there. So I'm curious to see what this group, how you all feel about the idea of a virtual desktop. Is it a good one? Is it something that you aspire to or use? And Andrew, since you're in late, how about we start with you? Let you lead it off.
It's been a long time since I've personally used any virtualization. I think for me, my idea is maybe it just depends on what kind of needs you have. As far as I know right now, I think at least Parallels maybe is optimized for the new M1 Max, but I'm not really sure of anything else.
Nope, not really.
They claim it is.
They say
it's certainly
coming.
a thing they say.
Yeah, and Adobe Photoshop works on the M1.
Yeah.
I'll hold my comment. Go ahead, Andrew. I'll let you know.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, is anybody using any of those options?
Maybe we should define what virtual desktop means, because what you said, Chuck, is not what I think of as virtual desktop. It's more like what Andrew was saying, like things like VMware and Parallels.
Okay, I think I'm with you, Jim. We're probably thinking about the same thing, which is like almost like having a thin net client where you can sit down at any computer and have your entire experience the same, all the same files, all the same apps. And
well, that's kind of what people are doing right now, though. I mean, working from home. If you work in an environment that requires security, most of us are using something like Citrix or an equivalent to that, and we're logging in, and like I'm here at a Mac, but I log into work and I'm looking at Windows. But for me, I think that possibly there's another way we could look at this, in that Apple actually had a thing called Spaces, where you could have, like, if you're working in animation and then you're having to work with video and then you're having to work with audio, where you have a different desktop set up for each one of those particular types of workflow that you want to use. And then Apple with Spaces, I believe, allowed you to switch between those. So, and it would take your existing desktop, kind of reduce that down to a minimal size, and then give you the full resources of the computer so that you could do these other things. Or am I misremembering this?
That's
I think
how it
it's
works.
still there.
You can still do that. It's an easy way to context switch. Like your whole layout is different.
Yeah.
You can have, like some apps that are sort of confined to that one particular desktop. I don't have that set up now. I did have it set up before and did like it, and it worked really well.
I've actually, I remember it, but I never actually used it. Now that I'm on an M1 for the most part, virtualization up to this point doesn't really work that well. Dave was talking about that as well. So until VMware and who's the other big company?
Parallels.
Until they kind of get their act together on how they're going to go with this. And remember, part of the problem is not only are they having to virtualize an operating system, they're having to virtualize a completely different type of hardware platform, whether it's, because most of the virtualization that you're looking at is for OSs that run on x86. And if you're on an M1, you're no longer doing that. So you're having to virtualize within a virtual environment, and that way leads to madness almost, I think, maybe.
Well, so I think Jim had a good idea, because this is kind of interesting right off the bat. I took the question to be virtual desktop, like the thin net client thing. You log into it and there is everything right there, which would also allow you to easily use, two Macs or, a desktop and a laptop and have everything right where it should be. As soon as you logged in, that would be it. You guys are talking about virtualization, where you have virtual machines that can run either other iterations of the OS or other iterations of other OSs. And I think there was actually somebody in there that was even talking like, it sounded like maybe a third option. So I thought the question was about the thin net client version thing, but that was my interpretation of the question. And I don't see the asker here in the chat room, at least not right at the moment, or I would ask for a clarification.
So we can make up whatever question we want. Can you hear me now, by the way?
Yes, you sound much better. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Jim. Yeah. So let's start out. I mean, because Guy already talked about virtualization. So let's talk about the other version of the virtual desktop that I was talking about, storing everything in cloud storage and then accessing it through a client or by logging in. Is anybody doing any of that?
Yeah, I can attest to that with in the Microsoft world, OneDrive. OneDrive is now enabled full virtualization. So now all your files will now reside on the cloud. And when you need them, you grab them, you work on them, and they go back up to the cloud. So it saves space on a local machine. So there's that part of the virtualization. But you're also talking about, remote desktop, again, in the Microsoft world, when they're still using that to be able to remote desktop into a machine on a local network. Then you got virtualization services like a remote PC or others that are out there that you can have that machine out on the internet and be able to remote into your machine anywhere. So you don't have to bring, so you don't have to bring that big machine home with you, or be able to work on it from home and just remote in with a laptop or any device that has that support of the virtualization of remote PC type services or remote desktop type services. But I was going to just touch on the virtual machines in itself. We talk about Parallels on the M1. Parallels is beta testing it right now, but it's way too early right now to even consider doing that. Microsoft really doesn't have a virtual Windows 10 ARM based OS, and what they do is it's in very early beta stages, and it's god awful horrible. I tried it because I went in the beta. I mean, I'm a big Parallels user. I still have my Intel Mac, and I do have all the virtual old Mac OSs as well as Windows, and being able to go into there and see the OSs when I need to when I'm doing something. I still have that value with Intel, so I'm a little concerned. Is that going to be virtual at some point? So I mean, I know I'm going all over here with the differences in the virtualization here, but that's really, I think, where the world is now. But you have virtual machines with the virtualization like Parallels or VMware, and then you have the virtual machines where you can actually virtually sign into a machine and be able to do it, and have all your files out onto the cloud and not have to ever worry about not being able to access them.
It's very squishy, the actual definition of this, for a bunch of reasons, because a virtual desktop could be, my computer, because I have a laptop, and like my computer has one screen, but I can set it up with spaces and have a second desktop or whatever, is one way to do it. And then there's like cloud computing, where you can spin up instances of things like in an AWS bucket or whatever. And when you do something like that, that's also technically, virtual desktops. And then there's sort of the hot desking thing, where you work at a company and any computer you walk up to and feed it your credentials will give you your desktop picture and your email and your icons arranged however you desire and all of that. And doing all of that is fine. But all of those are sort of virtual computing situations, and they're all very, very different. So it's kind of hard to, if we're going to suss this out, I think a lot of people have been forced into virtual computing. Like Guy was talking about, I use my computer at home and I VPN into work, and then there's a machine at work that I log into. And if somebody walked by it and could see the monitor, you could see clicking around and doing all the things that people are doing. Yeah, there's a fair amount of that happens, I'm sure, through remote desktop. more or less. And there's things like that I think a lot of people have sort of gotten a crash course in over the last year. I'm not currently doing any of those things. The Mini behind me does have the public preview of Parallels for M1 on it. That's an M1 Mini back there. It has the public preview of Parallels, which they go to great lengths to tell you is not production level software. I don't think it's overstating anything to say that when you do this, you have to use the ARM version of Windows 10. When you go download that, they also sort of say like, this is a not ready for primetime player. And like on and on. And there's like a bunch of things that have to go into making that a reality for the computer back there. So, it's kind of hard. I think, again, it depends on kind of what the person was asking. But as far as like virtual desktops, like walk up and log into anything, I think there may be some of that coming as people trickle back into offices where it's going to be less important what machine you have. And like, these are the 5 people that come in and do, that come into accounting on Mondays. And so they sit at 5 computers and that's that. And that's all you get. And then Tuesday, it's 5 different people or whatever, and everybody wipes everything down in between. And that's the new reality is, if people do want to come into the office, like it's going to end up having to be something like that. I think on the Windows side, that's called roaming home profiles or roaming home directories or something like that. So I can totally see something like that becoming a lot more common. But I don't, given how thin everything can be now anyway, I don't see thin clients being something that's going to continue to climb from a computing perspective.
It's not really necessary anymore.
Yeah.
Really,
and Kelly, thank you, because you were that was the third option when I was trying to run through what the third one was, and that is the spaces in the Mac OS. The feature called Spaces. So I wish you were here to clarify this, because I've tried using Spaces and it works really well in certain situations if I really need a very specific setup to do something. But I found it just a little bit confusing to say, okay, I want Safari running in this space, I want Safari running in this space, but I want them to have different windows, but I still want them to be Safari. Or whatever application. So I'm still kind of working on that.
Spaces is not really virtual desktops. It's just a fancy way to arrange windows.
They call them desktops now, I think.
Yeah, they do call it desktops. So.
I think it may have improved.
Oh, I wish they wouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, basically, it allows you to concentrate on a particular task without having everything else that the Mac OS may be doing. If you're trying to do video editing and you also have Photoshop open and you also have this open, you have that open, well, that's taking up a lot of resources of your computer. But if you can go to a different space or a different desktop, all those other things are still there, but they're put into like a virtual freeze, kind of a minimized, so that the full resources of the computer can be used in this new desktop that you've just opened up to do other things.
It's like when you switch apps on your phone, like that other app is still there, but it's kind of on pause until you come back to it.
I don't think internally Spaces are treated any differently than a window that's not in the foreground.
I was going to say, Jim, because so I'll take a resource heavy task. If I'm using Handbrake to rip a movie in one space, and then I shift to another space to answer email, I don't. My impression was not that Handbrake space would freeze or set or in any way degrade.
No, it'll keep going full tilt.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying it's just a way to arrange windows for your convenience, but internally, like unlike a virtual, like to me, I think the biggest, question about virtual desktop is what processor is running my task. So especially you think about like remote sharing. Okay, well that means, the the computer that has my mouse and keyboard and display is not the one where the processor, resources are happening. It's some other one, like maybe in another room another building. Now I have 3 computers on my desk. I've got my main MacBook, and then I've got a Mac Mini, and I've got a MacBook. But I just use a remote desktop to access them all. So sometimes I'm using these other computers, and I'm working on a system where I need to coordinate between the different computers, but I don't actually, even though like I've got a MacBook here, I could look at it, but that's inconvenient. I just, so the display is on my main screen, but the task that I'm doing is running on this other processor. So, and that's where like now they've got online games where basically, the processing is happening up in the cloud somewhere. And the only thing that's being used on your computer is the screen. And, we've got so much bandwidth now that we don't, it used to be you really had to have the computer connected to the monitor by a high-speed cable. And now the internet is a high enough speed cable that you can use a processor, in another country to do your job. And in some cases that's faster because that processor might be faster than the one you have. And the internet's fast enough to send the display changes. So, we can decouple the processor from the I/O that you're connected to.
Yeah.
Jim, would you mind describing in a little more detail what you were talking about with your 3 Macs? You said you're remoting into each one of those and putting them on your screen so that their processors are able to handle whatever they're doing independently, but you can still see them on your main screen. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, it's not so much because of the processor, but it's like, I'm working on developing some software that works across multiple users and computers and coordinates. So I need multiple computers to do that. And so it's just convenient for me to just use one keyboard and one mouse and one display instead of physically moving, to use a different mouse and stuff. So I just, I use Remoteix Pro, but there's, all kinds of different screen sharing programs. So, I basically have multiple computers and I can kind of access it like Spaces. So that other computer just comes up as a window on my computer. So when I want to go into, use that other computer, I just bring up that screen sharing window, or I could even zoom it so it's full screen and it looks as if I'm working, directly attached to that computer, but I don't have that computer wired to a monitor or wired to a keyboard or a mouse. It's just all being done through the screen sharing.
Okay. So it wouldn't matter. That machine could be on the desk beside you in your basement or in Paris. It wouldn't matter. You're remoting into it. And
right.
it's doing its thing. So
as long as the connection to Paris was fast enough. Another option along those lines, which I have, but I don't use much because the remote works just as well, really, is the Luma, which is a little nub that plugs in. And I've got that plugged into my Mac Mini, but I've found I don't really use it because, I guess they're like, oh, it's faster, but it's really not. I just use screen sharing and that maybe if I was going to be doing full time, it might be better, but it's another option.
Still,
same idea.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
it is cool.
Yeah.
There you go. Comes in a cool box.
Yeah, comes in a cool box too.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's something to that because of the speed of everything, right? Like it used to be the thing that you could do to make sure that your computer was fast enough was have a fast enough processor. And then we got to where there was kind of enough processor and it was your RAM. You had to make sure you had enough or that it was the right speed. And then it was hard drives. Like you had to go from a 5,400 RPM drive to a 7,200 RPM drive. And I'm not dating myself at all by making these references. And then it was your internet connection. Like, your processor is the fastest thing. The thing that you're waiting on is not your computer. The thing that you're waiting on is the internet when it was dial up. And, and like we've kind of gotten to the point where the person is now the slow link in the chain, like as fast as I can process the information. Like my computer's already done it, the internet's already done it, whatever it is that I'm trying to do, like it's me reading it now that is the part that takes the longest. It's not waiting for the page to load, it's not sending the request, it's not the web server feeding it up. And so there's a certain amount of that speed. And I think, Jim, that's where that comes from. Like maybe that computer's on your desk, maybe that computer's in Antarctica, and it doesn't matter, as long as the connection is solid. And that didn't used to be the case. That used to, that was always kind of a thing we had to sort of solve for, was which part is the slow part of what I'm trying to do right now. Yeah. And that's gotten very different.
Jeff, have you had any experience with any of this? Because I know so many of the jobs that we know you from, you've been working remotely. Yeah, it's purely remotely.
I've been purely remote for over 20 years, and it's great. But if I was purely remote and I was having to do remote desktop where it was like a thin net client, or to date myself, what we called them way back in the day, dumb terminals. Holy crap, no. No. Oh, no. Please do not let that ever come back, because at that point you are so reliant on everything else from everyone else. If something goes wrong, you're just screwed. And if you don't have your connection, you are just screwed. So I like kind of a hybrid thing. First, the whole notion of being able to remote into another computer, I'm so glad we can do that. As a matter of fact, I do it all the time on my own network. I have a couple Raspberry Pis that are running server tools for different things, and I'll just sit with my iPad on the couch and I'll remote into those computers and do whatever I need to do, as if I had plugged a monitor and keyboard and mouse directly into them. And it's awesome. And I love that we can do that. I love the ability to remote store data, and especially data that is shared with other people. So the really easy example would be you're using Google Docs and Google Drive as part of your company. All those spreadsheets and text documents that you've created, everyone else has access to those, or at least everyone that should, because they're all in that same pool, and you're accessing them as if you were pulling them directly off of your own local storage. And I like the idea of being able to use your local horsepower for applications and not have to rely on the bandwidth of some server in some remote location. And I know for a lot of people that's not a problem, but I mean, come on. Our internet is not as perfect as we would like it to be. And there are many times over the past decades that I've been doing this, where if I had to rely solely on an internet connection to be able to access the applications and documents that I use on a daily basis, I would be straight up screwed. So I like a hybrid. Let me have a common area that I share with other people, but let me control what I'm doing locally as well.
Jeff, your mention of Google Docs brings up another aspect to all this, which is we've been talking about virtual desktops and things like remote sharing, where essentially the interface from remote is, pixels of what's on the screen. But Google Docs is another way that's becoming much more common, which is an API, where the communication between the local computer, the local client and the server is not just, bits of pixels, which is kind of dumb, but a more smart targeted. So, instead of sending, however many bytes a screen is refreshed over and over again, it's just sending, a few hundred bytes of JSON, and only when you're actually doing something. So, that's another way that we move forward in the last 15 years, especially in collaboration, and that the tools are being built for collaboration from the start, and just communicating structured data. Whereas, screen sharing, remote screen sharing, is basically taking the old technology and just, slapping on this way to mirror the same data in another location. But, the new thing that's happening more and more and more is, instead there's a smart interface where the data is being, just small amounts of data are being passed back and forth in a structured way. And a lot of the stuff that we use, we don't even realize that's going on because there's like JavaScript in the web client that is actually communicating with the server via JSON, and it's not even sending HTML from the server anymore. And then the local, the JavaScript locally is turning that into the HTML that we see.
Okay, so I want to mix this up a little bit because another thing that occurred to me, and I have played with this that much, not much at all, but there was, for a little while, it seemed like there was a little bit of rebellion going on against the cloud services, and now we have several vendors offering personal clouds that are hosted by you as a dedicated machine. I'm thinking about Synology's Cloud Station. I'm thinking about the Western Digital solution. I apologize to Western Digital. I can't think of the name of it. It may be WD Cloud or something like that. But so that I have a box that I can set up specifically to be a cloud server and have Dropbox-like capabilities, iCloud-like capabilities. It's just that those servers are not sitting somewhere in some remote location. They're sitting right beside me. And I'm curious to see how you all feel about that, especially from a security standpoint, because that means that those files are online, and I don't have an IT department doing my IT security. So that may be good. Frankly, with some of the IT departments I've seen, that may be good. I'm not sure. And no offense, David, that was not aimed at you.
I know.
But so I'm curious. Has anybody played with any of those solutions, and do you like them?
I had actually had a WD cloud drive that was attached to my network, and it was pretty bad. I had trouble accessing it remotely, and the whole time that I was like struggling to get on with it, I felt like, as hard as this is for me, it would probably be ridiculously easy for someone else to just break in and see all my stuff. And eventually I just took it off because I just wasn't comfortable with it. I was relying on Western Digital to give me a complete solution, and just based on how much trouble I had, it just didn't seem to work.
Yeah. Andrew, any experience with any of this?
Not a whole lot. I have been thinking kind of recently about kind of doing the same thing, setting up my own kind of cloud on my own network. I haven't gotten around to it. I have heard of cloud-enabled hard drives, like Guy was saying, but I haven't really played around with that yet.
Okay. Frank, you've been strangely quiet throughout this whole thing. Are you still with us? Or is that just a
No, I'm with you. It's just to be perfectly honest, I know nothing of this subject. And from what I've heard everybody say, I'm not in a position to have any need for it. Because basically I do everything on my own. Mm-hmm. And my whole network is just handoff and continuity, because I just write articles. And when I do videos solo. I work things out that way. So I haven't had much. The only thing I could say about cloud is like storing things in cloud. Dropbox lost about 12 years of my daughter's photos from when she was born.
Oh.
And I got after them, and they said, well, sorry, nothing we can do about it. You should have contacted us after 30 days. Been 15 years. Now, oddly enough, I still have never canceled my Evernote account, which I started when I used to write for Dennis Sellers about 15, 16 years ago. I just, for the fun of it, went into it the other day. It had reviews I wrote in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe it. Now, has anybody else had problems with Dropbox? Or
not really.
No.
I started with iTools, and so I have an inherent distrust in every cloud service that everyone is ever going to try to sell me forever. No, just no. Or if I put it there, that's not the only one. I do have a NAS behind me. I think it has a remote access option.
Our panel has a lot more to say about virtual desktops, cloud services, the commercial cloud services, and the personal cloud services, the idea of running a cloud service right off of a server on your desk. They also have some very specific thoughts on what servers you might or might not want to run, depending on what your use case is, if you are planning to do it right on your desk, and the idea that you can also go and rent computers' time from some of the professionals. That's next time on Mac Voices. Until then, I'm Chuck Joyner, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.